All right, back from my honeymoon vacation, and I wanted to share this video about how I finally stopped binge eating on the weekends and during my vacation without willpower, because I think this is something that a lot of people who struggle with losing weight and keeping it off, this is what they deal with. You know, a lot of times we are told that we need more willpower. We need more motivation to stick with our diet and to be consistent with our workouts. We need more discipline, or we need more accountability. We need to want our goals bad enough, you know? And a lot of it comes down to like we try to willpower our way to weight loss. And while, you know, it has its place, it's not really an effective long-term strategy because willpower comes and goes. It's not very reliable. It's very fleeting, just like motivation is. And you know, this was an interesting time, you know, because I went on my honeymoon for 12 days. So I had, you know, some weekends that I had that I was going to be gone for, and a whole week. We were on a cruise ship. We were surrounded by more food than you can imagine. And most of it was not the healthiest food. So, you know, for me, weekends were always a time, and vacations were always a time where I would allow myself to indulge a little bit. The problem is that, you know, I wasn't able to control it very well. You know, every time the weekend would hit, no matter how consistent I was during the week, in a matter of a couple days on the weekend, I'd fall off track. I'd, you know, overeat, binge eat. You know, I'd go through these weekend long binges that would bleed into the next week. And it was like, you know, taking 2 steps forward, and then boom, the weekend comes and I go 2 steps back. And I didn't want that to happen on this vacation. You know, because every vacation I went on, same type of thing would happen. I'd have the best of intentions, but by the time I got home, I'd be bloated, I'd be tired and exhausted because I ate like crap the whole time. I'd be dealing with weight gain and, you know, be heavier. And, you know, it would take me like weeks and sometimes up to a month to get myself back to normal, get the holiday or the vacation weight off, you know, get the bloating down, get my energy back up and start feeling normal again. And I really did not want that to happen this time. And, you know, the big difference for me was this time compared to all the other times. All the other times I'd go into my vacations and even weekends focusing on restriction, right? I can only eat this many calories. I can only have this kind of food. I can't eat this. And I didn't want to be dealing with that. I didn't want to be focused on that. And specifically because I'm going on a honeymoon, I wanted to enjoy my time with my wife. You know, we're going on vacation on this cruise ship. We're going to Hawaii. We're visiting all the islands, you know, and I wanted to have a really good time, but I also wanted to have some, structure in place. And I wasn't tracking anything. I didn't track one meal. I didn't track a single calorie. I didn't track carbs, protein, fat, none of it. And so, you know, really instead of, you know, focusing on the restriction and what I could and couldn't do, I focused instead on something different, which was nervous system regulation, which this is something that I don't really hear anybody talking about. Everything is about diet, exercise, willpower, motivation, and nobody's talking about the real reason why we often struggle with those things. And it's because of nervous system dysregulation. You know, I think a lot of times when we give in to food cravings that we can't control, we binge eat, we overeat, we kind of are led to believe that it's this kind of like this sign of weakness, right? You don't want your goals bad enough. You lack discipline. You need more willpower, whatever, right? You gotta fight harder. You gotta suck it up. You know, and instead of understanding that these are not signs of weakness, these are symptoms of nervous system dysregulation. And no matter how much you try and fight it and willpower it, the brain and nervous system are more powerful than your willpower, your motivation, your discipline. Eventually, the brain and nervous system will always win out. You might be able to white-knuckle it for a while, but eventually you're going to give in. So instead of trying to fight that uphill battle, my focus was, let me regulate my nervous system and make sure I go in, you know, with the best, kind of level the playing field as much as possible, right? With the best chances. So here's the thing that happens. You know, we have to understand too that, you know, when you're dealing with cravings and binge eating and all that, like I said, it's not a sign of weakness or needing more willpower, discipline, motivation. What happens is that this happens when your brain and nervous system are perceiving threats to your survival. The more threats that your brain is interpreting, when that gets to be significant enough or high enough, whatever we want to call it, your brain activates a survival response. And when the survival response is activated, you will behave in ways that will go against your weight loss goals, even though you're not supposed to do these things. So for example, you're not supposed to eat the dessert or the pizza, but it's like you do it anyway. You do the things that you're not supposed to do, and you can't seem to control it. And again, it's not because you're weak. It's not because you lack willpower or motivation. It's because you're dealing with nervous system regulation. Your brain is interpreting threats to your survival. And one of the ways that we are built to survive is, one, get away from the danger. And two, we've got to eat food to survive because your body needs energy. So that's what happens. We start eating in ways like we're starving, and we're not. But the brain and nervous system are just hardwired to send those signals out. So again, like I said, you can white knuckle it all you want, but eventually brain and nervous system win out. So instead of trying to fight against it, we trying to regulate it works so much better. And that's really what I did this time, and even when I was on the cruise, like I said, I was surrounded by all these kinds of different foods and everything. But the difference was that I went into it, pretty well, like even keel, feeling like my nervous system was very well regulated going in. So what happened was, it wasn't like I was immune to the desire to want to eat the desserts and all that. And don't get me wrong, I had my fair share of things. It wasn't like, I was super disciplined and didn't have any cake or ice cream. I certainly did. But the difference was that I was able to stop when I needed to stop. I didn't have to try to control it. I didn't have to force myself to put my fork down. And while I had a couple of those days where I went way overboard with what I ate, out of 12 days, only 2 of those days were like that. And the other 10 days, I won. If I'm winning 10 out of every 12 days, I'm doing very well. I'd say the same thing to anybody who struggles with weight loss. So it's not about being perfect. It's just about really being regulated, right? And being consistent, because when your nervous system is regulated, that's where consistency starts to happen. You might lose some days, don't get me wrong, but you're going to win more days than you lose. And in the end, that's how progress is made. You're going to get consistently closer to your weight loss goals and eventually achieve them, rather than going through that on again, off again cycle where, you do good for a while and then you slip back up into old habits, and then you go off track for a while, and then you gain a bunch of weight back, and then you start over and you go through that cycle, 2 steps forward, 2 steps back all the time. So like I said, I have the desire to keep eating, but the difference was it was easy for me to control. I didn't have to fight it. I wasn't white knuckling it. And it wasn't like I was not enjoying my vacation because I was obsessing over food. I didn't really have to. And that made all of the difference, So some of the things that I did in terms of regulating my nervous system, like for me, one of them was something called interoception. So it's just basically I was paying attention to what was going on inside of my body. And the reason why that's important is because a lot of times, we get signals or we feel certain things in our body. For example, we might feel hungry, and at times when your body really doesn't need food, and you will want to grab food or eat. And it is something that I find so many people do, and I've been guilty of this as well. If I'm not accurately interpreting the signal that I'm getting, a lot of time that signal is really your body's way of saying it needs water. It's dehydrated. The problem is it's easy to misinterpret that signal when we're out of tune with what these signals mean in our body. We might be aware that a signal's coming, right? I feel a certain way. I feel hungry, but we're not accurately interpreting what that signal means. Oh, wait a minute. I'm actually not really hungry. I don't need food. What I do need is water. And so, that's just kind of one way to do it. But I really focused on, instead of just grabbing food right away when I felt hungry, I tried to understand, is this really a need for food, or do I need water right now? And Most of the time, it was a need for water, especially in the climate in Hawaii where it was very warm. We were in the sun all the time. It's very humid over there, we were walking a lot and doing a lot of things. So, it was easy to get dehydrated but if I wasn't paying attention to those signals, I could have easily misinterpreted it as, let me grab some food. I'm starving when, my body really just needed water. So that was one thing I did. Another thing was inhibition tools. And I've talked about those tools before, so you can check out other videos that I have. But I always made sure I was inhibiting the survival response when it got activated. Now, again, I had to pay very close attention to understand when I was in the middle of that. So for example, if we were out in the sun all day, I would be very tired, I'm fatigued, I might be a little moody, irritable, not quite feeling like myself. Those are times when I'm engaged in that, or that survival response got triggered. There's no big alarm bells that go off with it though. It really was just understanding for me what that feels like, and then being able to use some inhibition drills to inhibit that response and get myself back to normal. Because when I'm in that response, like I said, when you're in it, your logical thinking kind of goes out the window. And so inhibiting that response is a way to get your logical thinking back, because when you've got your logical thinking back, you make the best decisions in terms of food choices. And that's what I wanted to make sure that I stayed on top of. So, it was just things like that. Like I said, the biggest difference, on this trip, and I think the biggest difference with, succeeding in your weight loss goals and achieving them, really comes down to regulation versus restriction. Restriction can work. You can focus on only the amount of calories that you need to eat, only eating these foods, staying away from these foods. But I think that it gets very difficult at certain times because it requires constant willpower and motivation and the discipline and all that. And while these things have their place, again, I don't think they're effective long-term strategies. When you are focusing on keeping your nervous system regulated, it's so much easier to manage food cravings. You kind of calm those cravings down. And when you don't have the cravings anymore, you're not likely or as likely to engage in overeating and binge eating because you're not dealing with constant cravings that you're having to control. You don't have to rely on motivation and willpower because you're in control. So you don't have to control things, you're in control of things. Hopefully that makes sense and hopefully that helps. But I just wanted to share that. So, if you are struggling with overeating, if you're struggling with inconsistency with your diet and exercise, if you're struggling with self-sabotaging behaviors, doing things that you're not supposed to be doing, and even though you're not supposed to, this is what is kind of at the root of it. So, if you want to learn the specific nervous system tools that I use to turn the cravings off, and to, calm that survival response and to stop binge eating and to increase consistency, so that you can use these tools to achieve your weight loss goals, then be sure to subscribe to this channel. And in the meantime, check out this video.